Hi, I'm Bill Hubbard. Thanks for joining me as we take a peek into my life outside of work. When I'm not sitting in front of a computer writing code, I can sometimes be found out in the backyard picking bugs out of the swimming pool, or cleaning the litter boxes, or wasting my time reading comments on Facebook. But what I really like to do is partake in one of my favorite hobbies, building and flying radio-controlled model airplanes. Let me show you what I've got. I know that looked like a lot of airplanes, but it was just several shots that cycled a few times, and some of those were the same airplane with a different wing on them because I can fly them in different configurations. And I'll show you a couple of my airplanes, but first I want to show you one of these. This is a radio transmitter, and this is what you use to control a model airplane. It works on FM frequencies on 72 megahertz, and it is an old school radio from the mid-1990s. It's a Futaba T6XAS, but this is my go-to radio. I fly this a lot. A flying buddy of mine also flies on these. And these operate on 72 megahertz, and there's different frequencies that are allotted that people can use, and no two people can be on the same frequency at the same time. So we've got to make sure that if you're flying with somebody else, you are on a different frequency than they are. Otherwise, you can interfere with each other and crash your planes. But typically, an airplane will have four primary channels that's controlled by these two gimbals, or sticks. We just call them sticks. And they'll spring back to the middle, except for this one. This one we use for the throttle, because typically you want to set your throttle and fly controlling these other sticks, and if you let go of these other sticks, that centers your controls. So depending on what kind of airplane you're flying, that may level itself out. So if you get disoriented or get in trouble, let go of your sticks and your plane should correct itself. At least the trainer aircraft do that. Most airplanes have four primary channels. You have the throttle, and then over here you would have rudder, and then ailerons and elevator. These are the four different controls that control the three axes of your planes plus the speed. So the rudder over here would be on the yaw axis to rotate your aircraft this way. The ailerons are on the roll axis to rotate your aircraft this way. And then the pitch makes your airplane pitch on this axis to go up and down. A lot of my airplanes are only on 3-channel. I don't have ailerons. So in that case, instead of having the rudder over here, I'll put the rudder over here. So I have rudder and aileron on one stick, or rudder and elevator on one stick, and the ailerons don't do anything. The stick doesn't do anything. So it's just throttle over here. So technically I can fly with one hand. Did I show you the antenna? At 72 megahertz, that's a low frequency compared to newer radios today that operate on like 2.4 gigahertz. But 72 megahertz has a fairly long wavelength, and I think this is a quarter wave antenna, which means it's a quarter of the wavelength of one cycle of the 72 megahertz frequency. A half wavelength antenna would be twice as long as this, so it would be very unwieldy, and a full wave antenna would be ridiculous. So we have these nice long quarter wave antennas. But I like this radio because there aren't a whole lot of people who fly on these frequencies anymore, which means there's not a lot of interference to worry about anymore. And it's using a protocol called PCM, or pulse code modulation, which is a way of digitizing the signal. So it's sending a digital signal to the receiver on the aircraft. So there's a receiver on the aircraft that's responding to all these controls. And there's other controls on here as well. There's a switch up here, there's a knob here, and there's another switch here. So you can have things like flaps, or a bomb bay hatch, or retractable landing gear that you can use these controls to control them with. So anyway, let me show you how this works. If you look in the airplanes, when I turn on this transmitter, you can see that when I move the stick, pull it back or push it forward, it moves one of the servos, and that's driving the elevator in the back. So I pull back to go up and push it forward to go down. This one over here like I said, I'm flying 3 channels, so my rudder's on this side. If I push the stick to one side or the other, it moves the rudder left or right. And then last, there's the throttle, which is this center servo. Oh, look! This is the very first model airplane I ever built. This was built from a kit called the Swizzle Stick 40 by Balsa USA. They still sell this kit, but it's just the Stick 40. It's no longer called the Swizzle Stick. The design is slightly different. You can tell that this one is a swizzle stick, the original, because of this rounded tail fin and rudder here. The newer ones have a more conventional fin. I have 2 of these and 2 of the later ones. So I have a whole fleet of these. And the little plane that you saw just before this is of the same design, but it's a smaller plane called the Stick 30. They don't make that anymore. However, I did find a kit for one of those on eBay recently, and the seller had a picture of one of my airplanes on his auction, so of course I had to buy it. So I have another kit that I can put together in the future sometime, so I'll have yet another one to add to my collection. And maybe I'll build it after I crash one of these so badly that I can't rebuild it. These are so simple to build and fix. It's mostly built of balsa wood. The wing's balsa wood, the tail's balsa wood. These sticks back here are like hardwood spruce sticks. The box here is a light plywood, so it's very strong. And these planes can just take a beating. I built this plane in 1982. Right now, this plane is 39 years old. No, really, it's really 39 years old. 2021 minus 1982. 39. Doesn't look a day over 42. But I have a video that I created showing the history of this plane, and I have that up on my YouTube channel. If you want to look for that, it's called Life of a Swizzle Stick. Anyway, I have another plane that's just like this one, except this one's blue and yellow. This one I built in 1983, just a year after the other one. So this one's 38. And this one has a fun little feature on it. Under here you can see this little box. That's a Bombay hinge. So what I can do is just throw this switch right here and drop whatever I put in there. And I never know what I'm going to find in there. But I can put anything I want in there, a little parachute or a ball or a water balloon, or the other day, my buddy and I were dropping golf balls to see how close we could roll them up to where we were standing. But as I mentioned earlier also, I can fly different configurations. I have some other wings that I can put on this airplane, mainly for flying at night. So I have one right here. This isn't a wing I built that I can put on any one of these Stick 40s. And you can see maybe that there's some green lights in here and some red lights in here. If I look on the bottom, it's got transparent red monocoat, and you can see the red and the green here. And that indicates what wing you're looking at. And that's conventional aircraft. That's full-scale aircraft as well. If you look up in the sky and see a plane flying over, you see a green light on one side and a red light on one side. You know which direction it's facing, because green is always on the right wing and red is always on the left wing. And then I have yet another wing. I can also fly this on any of my other my Stick 40s, but this one has ailerons. So I can fly 4-channel with this one. But it also has lights. Might be harder to see on this one, but there's red lights here, green lights here. Underneath you can see a little bit. You can see that there's some white lights under here as well. So you can only really see the red on the top and the green on the top. And probably can't see it from there, but there is a voltmeter built into the wing there, and I can check my voltage to monitor my batteries. Now, along with this, I have other lights that I can attach to the tail that have LEDs in them that light up the tail, and I have something on the front that lights up the fuel tank, so I can see kind of the profile of the aircraft as I'm flying. So that's it for the Stick 40s. One thing I like to do is mount a little camera on my plane so I can get some aerial shots from the view of the airplane. So I have this little Run Cam 2 here. It's kind of a popular camera, or at least it used to be. And one of the things I do is put it on one of my planes, and then I have this antenna here that mounts on top of a car and plugs into the back of this transmitter that I've modified. So I can drive along, well, I would ride in the back while somebody else drives, and we'd ride along with the airplane as we're flying, so we can get some cross-country footage. That's one thing I really enjoy, and one aspect that I'm starting to get into that's very interesting to me is long-range FPV. FPV is where you have a camera in the plane and you're looking through, say, a pair of goggles to see from the perspective of the airplane. So you're flying like that. So I don't have to follow along with the car. I can just use the goggles to see where the plane is going. And there's a video transmitter in the airplane. This camera would go in the front of the plane here. And by the way, this is the airplane that I plan to use. This is called a Zod XL Extreme, a Zod Dart XL Extreme. I'm looking at a box up here on my shelf. This is not a kit-built airplane. This is foam, so there's really no construction. But the wings come off and these fins come off. It comes apart and goes together really easily. They call them a foamy. And the difference here is this is run by an electric motor, so no more internal combustion engine. This is a new experience for me. But you can see that there's this antenna here, this big wiry thing. This is an antenna for a video transmitter that's mounted under the wing right here. And on this side, way over here, we have the receiver antenna, and the receiver is mounted in the wing right there. It's a real tiny little thing. But this is mounted way over here, away from here, because the frequencies that I'm running on are not 72 megahertz. These are running at 915 megahertz. And the video transmitter operates at 1.2 gigahertz. So they're fairly close together. So we separate the antennas as much as we can to avoid interference, because when you get kind of close to frequency, you can get some interference. So you mount the antennas as far apart as you can. But I have a battery pack here that I built, and it's built really well, if I may say so myself. But this is a 6,000 milliamp hour battery, so like a 6 amp hour battery. And it's made from lithium ion batteries. These are the good batteries, expensive batteries. And this pack I expect to last me quite a while. And I'm hoping that I can get up to an hour of flight time on this airplane with this battery, according to the research I've done. And this just goes in here. And when I plug it in, actually, I'll have to turn on the radio first. So let me show you a little bit about the radio. This is kind of like my other radios, except this is a newer version. This is a computer radio, and inside here is a 2.4 gigahertz transmitter module. That is what typically comes with a radio these days. This uses a spread spectrum technology that allows multiple people to fly at the same time on the same frequency, so to speak. It has this pseudo-random frequency hopping algorithm that it uses. You bind it to your particular radio, so your radio knows the sequence and it can talk to the radio. But I don't use this. I don't use the 2.4 gigahertz. I have another module here that plugs into the back. So you can plug in custom modules here, or alternative modules, and I switch away from the internal module to use the external module. And this is a Crossfire module. It's called Crossfire, made by Team Black Sheep, or TBS. This goes in here. It's got kind of an odd antenna on there, but this is a long range, or actually a directional antenna, and it's running at 915 megahertz. So the antenna is a little bit longer than this 2.4 gig one. I don't know if this is a quarter wave, half wave, what it is, but it's a diamond antenna. It's directional, so I will point it vertically at the airplane, or in the general direction of the airplane, and I'll get the best reception in that direction. So if I turn around, I might lose contact with the airplane. So I want to make sure I'm facing the direction where my airplane is flying. And that receives on this receiver through this antenna here. And so it's vertically polarized. You don't want to get it cross polarized or you'll get weak signal. Your strongest signal is if you have the same polarization with your antennas. So they're aligned like this. And because it's a vertical antenna, it allows the plane to be oriented in any direction and it's still the same orientation. Whereas if it was oriented this way, it would change its orientation. I'm confusing you. So let's get back to what I was doing here. I want to turn on the radio. One of the interesting things about this radio is
welcome to OpenTX.
It talks to me, but it's got a open source firmware that drives this called OpenTX, and all of these switches and controls on here are programmable.
Minus 100.
And there's 2, 4, 6, 8 switches. There's 2 sliders here. There's like 6 buttons here, 2 knobs, and all these things are programmable. And there's a whole user interface here that you can scroll through. There's even a little scroll bar. You can put a picture of your airplane in there. And one feature I like about this is I can program music into it. Who doesn't like to fly without music? So this is a little bit more advanced than the old school radio that I fly with my stick 40s. But if I now turn on the airplane, which means plugging in the battery, it's going to go through a whole startup sequence. And you'll hear it start beeping, and then this cover goes on here, and it's just on there with a magnetic mount, but you can hear it starting to beep. That beep is actually coming from the electric motor, because the motor is just a bunch of windings, so they can modulate that to make sounds. And it's telling me how many batteries are in the pack, what the electronic speed controller configuration is. It's setting up the flight controller. In here, there's actually a controller that goes in. I don't have this set up yet, but there's a flight controller that would go in here, and I've got a temporary one in there for testing, which I might fly the maiden flight with. I haven't flown this yet. It's still waiting for its maiden flight, but now that it's on, if I give it a little throttle, the motor starts right up. And this is very dangerous. You want to stay as far away from the prop as you can. They can cut you bad. And the internal combustion engines, same thing. They're very dangerous if you get your hands in it or in any part of your body. But at least with the internal combustion engine, they can't just spontaneously start up. These, however, they could be on and you don't know it. And if you accidentally hit the throttle, suddenly you can get hurt really bad. And I've got things blowing around my garage now. So I'm looking forward to flying this. Now, I did mention that there is a video antenna on here, and I have these goggles. So now what I need to do is show you how I receive the signals on the ground. I have a whole ground station set up for doing that. So let me show you that. This is called a pepper box antenna. This is a dual element radial antenna for long range reception. This is hooked to a couple of receivers, which I'll show you, but this is the primary receiving antenna for receiving video from the airplane when it's flying. Now, if we turn this around, you'll see that there's a whole mess of electronics attached to the back here. I have 2 receivers on here that receive 915, or no, actually 1.2 gigahertz. 915 megahertz is the transmitter frequency for controlling the aircraft. The video comes in at 1.2 gigahertz. And I have 2 antennas, or 2 receivers here, each with their own antenna. The big pepper box antenna is connected to this receiver, and then I have this other wiry antenna connected to here. The pepper box antenna is a directional antenna. It has about 165 degree width and about a 65 degree angle height. So as long as I'm flying out within that envelope, I can fly probably like 20 miles out. and still be able to see what I'm doing. The radio transmitter will transmit at least that far, so I don't think I can fly out of range of my controls. And the flight controller on board the aircraft has the ability where if I throw a switch, it does this return to home program. It triggers this return to home feature that flies it back because there's a GPS on board the aircraft, so it knows where it is and it knows where its origin is, because you set that up before you take off. You make sure that your GPS home coordinates are set in there, and then you can fly it out, and if you throw that switch to say, hey, come back home, it'll return to home on its own. So when this is powered up, and I have a couple of different options to do that, but I have a battery here that I can plug in. You can see everything that lights up here. I've got a couple of voltmeters because I've got a regulator on here for 5 volts. I have a regulator here for 12 volts. For some reason it's registering 11.4, so I need to look at that. I tried to adjust this earlier and it didn't change. But what happens here is this receiver is on an omnidirectional antenna, so that when I'm flying close by, I can receive the video from this antenna. When I'm flying out long distance, I'll be receiving video on this antenna. They'll both be receiving signals, but I have a switch on my transmitter because I have a receiver here that's also bound to the transmitter. Now, by the way, these receivers are actually transceivers. So I'm actually getting telemetry back from the aircraft with the GPS coordinates on it so that I know where it is and I can know its last known coordinates. If it goes down, I can go find it. But you can turn that telemetry off, which I've done with this one. So this is a receive only mode receiver. I've got it configured for receive only. So I can use that with a switch that I've programmed on the transmitter to switch between these receivers. So I don't have a diversity receiver which will automatically select the best receiver. I have to switch it manually, which is okay because I figure when I'm close by, I'll just switch to the omnidirectional and fly using that. And when I want to go out, I'll switch over to this one. But this is the switch right here that's plugged into the receiver, this little red light that's on here. You'll possibly recognize this antenna. I don't know if you can see it from there, but it's the same one that's on the airplane. So this is the receiver, plugs into the power source here. The switch down here also plugs into the power, so there's a signal that comes in and it switches between these two receivers to send the video signal, which is coming in there, to this line here, I think. Yeah, it's plugging into here, and this is a video amplifier. So this then has 4 outputs here. I can plug 4 different devices in to see what video is coming from these receivers. So one of these outputs I have connected to here, which is a little video transmitter on 5.8 gigahertz. 5.8 gigahertz doesn't travel quite as far as 1.2 gigahertz. So I'm using this as a relay because my goggles that I have here, I'm going to let this dangle, hopefully without issue. These goggles have a diversity receiver in them that receives video on 5.8 gigahertz. So I can be wearing these, and then my ground station here is acting as a relay station, receiving the signal in these 1.2 gig receivers and transmitting it on this 5.8 gigahertz transmitter, receiving in here, and voila, I can see. At the same time, I also have a DVR here that receives on 5.8 megahertz or gigahertz, and so it's receiving signals as well. And I can plug a little SD card in there to record what it sees. So I can record my FPV session on here, and then anybody else could plug in something here. If there's another person who wants to see and they can't see here because it's bright out, this is hard to see in the daylight, they could plug in a pair of goggles here, or we could plug in a laptop, or we could plug in any video recorder or any video device that you want on there. So that's my ground station. This is what I'm getting into, and right now this is the pinnacle of my hobby experience in flying radio controlled model airplanes. So I'm going to wrap this up here. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you found it interesting. And if you have any questions or you're interested in how you can get involved, don't hesitate to ask.